Thank you. Let me just tell you briefly what I've got out there on my book table. I mentioned this morning 10 Smart Things Women Can Do to Build a Better Life, the book that nearly killed me. I also have it in a group study kit, which is a DVD. It's a DVD study. I just want to put a bit of a disclaimer on this one. We did the DVD, or shot the video, like 12 years ago. So multiple hairstyles ago, before HD. Still stand by the content. God is still using it, but you just need to know it's not going to look the same as something that was shot yesterday. And for that reason, and I hope my friend who's helping me, Sarah, at the book table, is in the room. Are you in the room? Okay, good. Because I'm going to sell this one for $15 instead of $40, just because of the age of the video. Okay, and it comes with a book and a participant guide and the DVDs in it. Alrighty, and we're trusting God to take the risk of shooting the videos again because the book is still selling. And then I also have this one, Friend Me, Turning Faces into Lasting Friendships, in a small group study as well as a book. This is a really sweet story of a beautiful friendship I had from the time I was 11 years old until, well, I'm not going to give the ending away, but it is a really sweet story that's woven through it, and I use the story to teach lessons on relationships, how to find, fix, and grow great friendships. So this book is $12, 10 Smart Things is $10, and the newest one that I'm speaking from today is Kick the Boring Out of Your Life, Think Big, Take Risks, Travel Light. And if you buy all 3 books together, you can get them for $30. So there you go. That's the end of the commercial. And we like to offer really great prices on the books at events because, you're here, right? You've invested. And I really appreciate that you've invested this day here with us. We need this, women, don't we? We need to be together. We need spiritual input. We need to worship and just soak with the beautiful music. And I just applaud you for taking the time to be here. And you need to make sure that you contact all your friends the next time you have an opportunity to do this in 2 years, right? Every other year? She's not, yeah, okay. Right. Okay, well, about 4 years ago, I got my first pair of progressive glasses. It's official. I am old. Is anybody else here wearing progressive glasses? Oh, yeah, half the room. Okay, so you know that there's a bit of a learning curve when you get progressives, right? Like your brain, what you're seeing does not make sense to your brain for a little while. And all of this to say, the first week I had mine, I fell down the stairs. Well, actually, I fell down a stair. But I did it with great passion. You remember how uncoordinated and unathletic I am, right? I did it with so much passion that I sprained the outside of my ankle and broke the inside. Yeah, it wasn't good. And I wish so much that if I really had to break a bone, I would have done it doing something cool, like hang gliding or, skydiving, something like that. To have to tell people that you fell down a stair and broke your ankle is so humiliating. Actually, my husband and my daughter were skydiving last year, and my husband came home so excited, and he said, "Oh, hon, you've got to try it." And I said, "Seriously? Knowing how athletic and coordinated I am, and that I broke my ankle falling from the majestic height of one stair, you really think that jumping out of a plane would be a good idea for me?" My injury was super painful, and I had to have it screwed back together. And I wasn't allowed to bear any weight on it for more than 6 weeks. So my husband, Randy, went online and got a knee scooter for me. Have you seen those things? They're amazing. And, we had conferences to do. We had speaking engagements. I needed mobility. But I have to admit that with the pain meds I was on, I may or may not have been an impaired driver. Everyone experiences pain in life. Even for those few of us who grew up in great homes and managed to escape poverty and abuse and bullying and loss, eventually the bubble still bursts. Heartache inevitably penetrates our safe, happy world, and we're left to decide what comes next. Realizing that pain has a redemptive role to play in our lives can help us leverage our loss for our gain. Now, sometimes pain comes gradually. It accumulates over a period of years, its load becoming more and more unbearable over time, but it can also attack suddenly, like a lightning strike on the slope of a peaceful alpine forest. It's interesting that park wardens have grappled for years with the problem of igniting forest fires that are ignited by lightning. They've struggled with this question for about 100 years. You know, fire fascinates as well as frightens, and it can be an ally as well as an enemy. But historically, experts have seen fire more as an enemy. And they've seen it as a destructive force and have used everything that they can come up with to try and put fires out as soon as they start it. But in recent decades, ecologists have learned that eliminating fire from ecosystems is sort of like eliminating the wind or the rain. Forests actually depend on fire for renewal. So it turns out Smokey the Bear, his policy of fire suppression actually caused a lot of damage. In some areas, in fact, far more trees are destroyed by disease than by fire. And when fire does occur, it's far more dangerous because the forests have become overgrown and unnaturally dense. Because of these fairly recent realizations, many countries, including Canada, have started a program of prescribed fire, where specialists decide where, when, and within what limits these purposeful fires will be allowed to burn. Have you ever considered that maybe God, in his unfailing love, holds a similar philosophy? Maybe God recognizes that there are times where we need some extreme method of rebooting our hard drives so that we learn to live for what is transcendent. That maybe at times he allows or possibly even causes prescribed fire to invade our lives for a purpose, not for punishment. So much of what happens to us in our lives is beyond our control, isn't it? I mean, we can't prevent a recession or a congenital disease. No one plans to be in an earthquake or a car wreck. But there are two ways that we can take control of our future, even when our present seems to be orchestrated by an unkind, unseen hand. We can choose our identity, and we can choose our strategy. Whether we are victims or victors depends greatly on whether we choose to leverage our pain to grow our heart capacity or allow it to shrink away our humanity. Many years ago, I met a woman named Abigail. I quickly learned, after showing her the tiny gesture of kindness, showed to an acquaintance, that Abby had not had an easy life. I learned that she'd grown up in the home of a violent alcoholic, that she had known all kinds of health challenges since she was a little girl. She had endured grief, betrayal, and disappointment of nearly every kind. The toll it had taken on her was visible. She had a nervous tic, she suffered debilitating headaches, and was too anxious to drive or do almost anything independently. I really had compassion on her, and I spent hours and hours with her trying to help her overcome her past and to grow as an individual. I longed to see her blossom in her relationship with God and to flourish in the generous life that he had planned for her. She was lonely, and so I invited her into my friendship group. They received her graciously, even though the trajectory of every conversation and interaction ended up being about Abby and her pain. We quickly learned that not only did Abby not find humor in life, she didn't really understand anybody who did. In fact, she was pretty judgmental of our times of fun and laughter. Her pain often manifested as anger. It was like she was like an overfilled balloon, just one little touch and it would pop and there would be a loud and unpleasant explosion. And we began to understand why Abby was lonely. It was exhausting to be her friend. Now, Abby had every reason in the world to be hurt and angry. But as my friends and I spent more and more time with her, we became convinced that she wasn't willing to grab hold of the lifeline that we were trying so hard to hold out to her. In some strange way, she was comfortable in her identity as a victim and unwilling or maybe unable to summon the strength and the courage to free herself from the quicksand and self-pity and wasted potential. Now, nobody signs up to be a miserable person. But how can we avoid becoming one when life is so tragically unfair? It actually has very little to do with the injustice heaped upon us and everything to do with how we respond and the identity we choose. In John 16:33, Jesus said, "Here on earth you will have trials and sorrows, but take heart, because I have overcome the world." You will encounter pain in this life. Count on it. But we can take encouragement from the reality that God is not surprised or overwhelmed by the circumstances in our lives. He controls the border of the burn. And in relationship with him, we can be overcomers too. So that was one kind of an example. There is also a woman in my life named Jessica. She's actually my hairstylist. She came from Vietnam to Canada as a teenager in the years following the Vietnam War. Her dad had spent time in prison for his work helping the Americans during the war. And the communists had seized her family's land and all that they had, really. And their family became convinced that really the only hope they had for a good life was to start over again somewhere else. I can't even imagine how hard that would be to leave behind your country, family members, your culture, your language, the only home you'd ever known, not to mention a tropical climate, to move to Canada. And Jessica's life in Canada certainly hasn't been the happy ending that she had hoped for. One by one, her family members began to die of cancers linked to the chemical weapons that had been used in Vietnam. Despite all that loss, Jessica married and found great joy in the birth of her son, but her husband pressured her to work hard. She couldn't ever make him happy, and the marriage grew toxic and abusive. It was during these months that Jessica came to faith. And as God began to bring changes in her life, those changes did not sit well with her husband. After years of verbal abuse, Jessica found herself a single mother who needed to provide for her son. She worked long hours as a hairstylist, and like any good Asian daughter, stretched her capacity to care for her aging parents as well. Jessica's dad was the next in a long line of family members to get cancer. But by now, Jessica knew where her strength came from. She cried out to God for courage, and on his deathbed, she led him in a prayer to accept Jesus into his life, this man who had been a lifelong Buddhist. But Jessica's suffering wasn't over yet. She was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis. She has days where even styling hair is impossible because of her pain. And the powerful steroids that she takes to control the disease have damaged her liver. These years of struggle seemed to finally be coming to an end when, on a trip home to Vietnam, Jessica fell in love with a lovely Christian man, and they were married in Ho Chi Minh City. But even in their joy, they knew they would face months of separation before Danny would be allowed into Canada. Later, Jessica confided to me that if she had known how many years they would be forced to live apart, she never would have married Danny. She loves him enough to wish that he were free to marry and raise a family with someone who could share his days and lie beside him in bed at night. Then, while the cogs and wheels of the immigration process ground with epic sluggishness, something that should only happen in a soap opera happened to Danny in real life. This healthy 30-something man had a stroke, an actual speech-stealing, mobility-depriving stroke. Now, can you think of anything worse to have on your record when you're trying to gain access to a country with universal health care? So, after all these years, Jessica visits him in Vietnam once a year when she is well enough to travel. Sometimes she cries. She tells me honestly how she is when I ask, but she also smiles and laughs. She nurtures a close, healthy relationship with her now young adult son. She continues to care for her mother, who now also has cancer. She never speaks disrespectfully of her husband or resentfully about the war that has hung like a toxic cloud over her whole life. She doesn't rage at God over her chronic pain or at the Canadian government for denying access to the love of her life and shattering her hopes for more children. She reaches out and cares for others. She does what it takes, not just to earn a living, but to make a life, without family members who have passed, without the love of her life, and without her health. She doesn't demand life be easy or even fair. As I navigate seasons of suffering in my own life, there's a lot I can learn from Jessica and Abby. Our friends can either be a wonderful example or a terrible warning. Abby teaches us that we can get stuck in our circumstances, and if we do, eventually they'll start to dictate who we are and how we relate to people. We can see that unforgiveness is toxic to joy and can destroy our physical and emotional health. And we see that even patient, loving people get sick of caring for someone who's never able to care for them in return. Jessica, on the other hand, shows us that even though we can't choose our circumstances, we can decide how we're going to respond to them. Instead of being reactive to whatever pain we're experiencing, we can be proactive and choose a strategy to leverage that pain. We can be victims or victors. Now, I think that there are at least 6 constructive strategies for dealing with our pain. Maybe as I'm speaking, you'll think of some others. But the first one that I've learned is to replenish, don't retreat. I often crave comfort. In the past decade, there have been more difficult years in my life than easy ones. And it isn't unhealthy or unnatural to seek relief. What is problematic is when I seek comfort the wrong way. I read a great book called Counterfeit Gods by Timothy Keller. And according to Keller, our comfort can easily become our idol if we seek it instead of or apart from God. That really resonates with me because when I'm stressed, tired, especially when I'm sad, I don't always take my neediness to my Father, not right away. Sometimes I eat chocolate. I read fiction or cocoon in my soft, warm bed. None of these are wrong unless they replace God in my life. Relying on any other source for comfort creates an idol in my life, and like a figure carved out of wood or stone, an idol of dark gourmet chocolate isn't going to provide much help. In fact, it actually affirms our victimization. By making such a tiny temporary dent in our pain, it actually magnifies the size of our problems. When Jesus promised to send us a comforter, he wasn't pledging to send us an ample-bosomed grandma who would smother us with kisses and carbs. He was promising an advocate, a counselor, a helper. In fact, the whole meaning of that word, comfort, has really strayed from its origin. To us, it means ease and well-being, the absence of conflict or challenge. We avoid uncomfortable social situations like awkward conversations and confrontation. We enjoy the comfort of our favorite chair. We eat, drink, and dress for comfort. But the original Latin portrays something quite different, actually something more in line with God's definition. The prefix come means exactly what it sounds like, come. The root word fort is where we get the contemporary word fortify. So what comfort really means is to come alongside and fortify or strengthen. A word suspiciously like the Greek word for the Holy Spirit, who is our comforter. John 14:16 says, and I will ask the Father, and he will give you another advocate or comforter, depending on the version you're using. But usually when I'm looking for comfort, I want to disengage in order to protect and provide for myself. It's all about relief and retreat. God's version of comfort, though, is to replenish, and restore. You see, my way assumes the role of a victim. God's way assumes the stance of a warrior, a victor. So think about it for a minute. Ask yourself the question, how do I seek comfort? Do I go to God for strength and encouragement so that I'm prepared to re-engage those roles and tasks that He's assigned me? Or do I look for a way to soothe my wounded emotions, my overtaxed brain, my exhausted body with food, sleep, or alcohol? Some people use fiction, fantasy, or porn, or shopping to escape. Sometimes we can even map periods of struggle in our lives by, extra pairs of shoes and added pounds. How much better for us to take on the identity of a victor and gain growth in our spirits instead of our waistlines or our debt load. When I'm in need of comfort, I've learned over time that sense of longing is my heart's expression of homesickness for God, the only one who really understands my needs and is able to meet them. In coming to Him, I'm saying, I can't do this on my own. I have nothing left to give others or even the inner resources to keep going myself. Anything I thought I had in better times has been drained out of me. You are my only hope. After my mother-in-law's funeral service about 3 years ago, I collapsed exhausted into a chair. My husband made the observation, we'll be doing this again very soon. And I just began to weep. At that moment, I knew I didn't have the strength to do this again, especially if the memorial service we were talking about was for my precious papa. Having shared the care for my sister during her 16-month struggle with cancer, and then facing the end with my dad only 18 months apart, I know what it means to look down the road and be absolutely certain that I don't have the strength to do what needs doing. But I also know God. I know I can rest in His inexhaustible embrace and allow Him to infuse me with all that I need to walk the road of pain that He's placed before me. I knew even in that moment of exhaustion that my Papa God, who inhabits eternity, was already at my dad's bedside the moment he drew his last breath, just as he was beside me when I watched my sister breathe hers. And 5 months later, he was holding my hand as I held my dad's and whispered truth to him as he passed into Jesus' presence. Isaiah 41:13 says these beautiful words, I am holding you by your right hand. I, the Lord your God, and I say to you, do not be afraid, for I am here to help you. I'm convinced that it was God's strength that saw me through yet another family memorial service, the third in 18 months. I know He holds my mom in all those future moments when she cries in loneliness, and He will be her strength poured through me and others who love her. He's already on the other side of your crisis too, holding you, comforting you, strengthening you, providing you with all you need to be victorious in every kind of circumstance. So if you choose in your pain to run to God and draw your comfort from His limitless resources, you can walk boldly into the future, whatever it holds. He transforms the overwhelmed into the overcomer, the victim to the victor. Our second strategy is to honor your feelings and your faith. A couple of summers ago, while Randy and I were speaking at a family camp, I met a remarkable man. Because of a diving accident in his youth, he had been a quadriplegic for most of his life. But Walt does not see this as a reason to see life through dirty lenses. Each day when I saw Walt, I'd say, "How are you, Walt?" And he said, "Absolutely spectacular." Thursday, he must have been having a bad day because when I asked, the same thing, he downgraded his greeting to nearly spectacular. Walt reminds me of a lawyer that I met on a compassion trip. in El Salvador. He only practices law 2 days a week so that he can give the alpha dog share of his time to the children. He's a project director at a church. His challenges in that culture of corruption and poverty are as persistent as mosquitoes. And yet when this man of faith is asked how he's faring, his consistent response is always in victory. Now, during the past few years when I've struggled to keep my breathing apparatus above the waves, I haven't always felt victorious or spectacular. And as I've weighed how to respond to that inevitable "how are you" question, in light of these remarkable men that I've met, I've wondered, how can I respond authentically while keeping my outlook positive and faith-filled? How can I honor both my feelings and my faith? Because in reality, I'm not always noticeably in victory. I am not always absolutely spectacular or even nearly spectacular. But I have learned to say, I am blessed, because I am always, always blessed. I am surrounded by a supportive family and friends. I live in a great country and enjoy a lofty standard of living compared to most of the world. I am involved in work that I believe is making a difference. And even if none of that was true or was suddenly taken from me, the bedrock of my blessing remains. I have been adopted into God's family. My Papa God walks beside me and will never abandon me. He constantly supplies me with the strength for whatever lies in the path ahead. I am blessed every moment of every day. If I am grieving, frustrated, overwhelmed, or nearly spectacular, I am always in victory, whether I feel like it or not. We leverage our pain when we acknowledge our feelings, but focus on our faith. Our faith in God's ability to use our pain for our ultimate good, to redeem the ugliness of sin, of betrayal, of loss, of pain, of disease, and to bring beauty from it. And that brings us to the third strategy, which is to recognize redemption. My sister Debbie was my best friend. She knew she was dying for several months, and she bravely asked the question, who is in my life because I have cancer? Who wouldn't be in it otherwise? It was these people that became her focus. She realized that God is in the business of redemption, and he would use her disease and her clear perspective on life and eternity in a redemptive way. So in her gentle way, she gained the trust of the woman who styled her wig for her, the lady who fit her for her prosthesis, all of these people who were in her life because she had cancer. And they listened to her because of her strong faith and her calm acceptance amid painful circumstances. She won their deep respect. More than a year after Debbie's death, my friend's daughter Maria met a woman named Marcine who used to fit post-mastectomy patients for specialty bras. Maria remembered hearing from her mom that Debbie had been fitted in that shop where Marcine had worked, and she said, "Oh, you probably fitted my mom's best friend, Debbie Young." Marcine was suddenly all choked up with emotion. She said that she remembered her, that Debbie had made a huge and lasting impact on her. She said, "Oh, Debbie's such an incredible woman of faith with such love and grace." After her fitting, she returned to the shop where Marcine worked to give her a book to say thank you for her kindness and sensitivity that she demonstrated during the appointment. The book was one which had spoken to Debbie eloquently throughout her illness. It was Jesus Calling by Sarah Young. Marcine said in her really rough and tumble way, "Holy crap, I have to go home and open a bottle of wine and read that book. What are the chances? Oh, by the way, how is Debbie?" And Maria's heart sank. She said, "Oh, Marcine, I'm so sorry. Debbie passed away over a year ago." The dam broke and the tears cascaded. The very next day, Marcine came back over to see Maria because she wanted to show Maria the book that Debbie had given her and the inscription that she'd written inside. It read, "Thank you for your caring and going above and beyond for me. God bless you." And it included her phone number. In looking for people in her painful circumstances her cancer journey had placed in her path, Debbie was recognizing the purpose in her pain. And that's redemption. It's acknowledging the ways that God can use something so bad to bring something so good. Another glimpse of redemption I saw in my sister's last days was much more personal. My two daughters had been great friends as little girls, but as Kendall approached her teens, she no longer had much use for her little sister. She suddenly found Kevin's incessant ADHD-propelled chatter annoying, and Kevin was confused and hurt. She did everything she could think of to win back her sister's affection, with no results. I don't know how many of you have seen the movie Frozen, but if you remember the scene where little Anna is peering under the door and singing, "Do you want to build a snowman?" And Elsa's totally ignoring her. That was my two girls. Years passed like that. Kevin hopefully soliciting Kendall's love and attention, and Kendall stonewalling her. And then Kevin hit puberty, and it seemed like she suddenly had the cognitive skills to process all the rejections that she'd encountered from her sister and others. She went into a depression and seethed silently at her sister. Eventually, Kendall left home to attend college in another province, and God began to soften her heart. One day, she phoned home to ask for Kevin's forgiveness for the way she'd treated her for so many years. And I think part of Kevin really wanted to accept Kendall's apology, and their relationship improved somewhat, but deep down, the anger continued to burn in Kevin. More years passed. Kendall earned 2 degrees and got married. Kevin also graduated from college and moved to a city an hour and a half north of Calgary, where she began her career. And Debbie got sick. My girls watched as I cared for my sister with all the tenderness in my heart. I went with her to chemo and for tests. My younger sister and I helped her pick out a wig after she lost her hair. And as she became sicker, I did her Christmas shopping, wrapping, and sewing for her. As the disease progressed even further, Jocelyn and I helped her in and out of bed and to use the toilet. We bathed her. We took turns sleeping in her room toward the end. There's nothing I wouldn't have done to bring her comfort. And as my girls watched my love and my grief, something broke in Kevin. She knew how deeply I valued the relationship I was losing. And here she had a sister who wanted that kind of friendship with her, and yet Kevin was rejecting her. During Debbie's last days, my daughters put their past behind them and embraced the future as friends. And these days, it's not uncommon, if they're both over, for me to walk into a room and find them curled up together on the couch like a couple of kittens. It's beautiful. And despite the fact that they are very different young women with very divergent interests, they share their lives with one another, and they love each other fiercely. That is redemption. God used deeply painful circumstances to bring deep healing and great joy. Our fourth strategy is to learn what health can hide. My dad's cancer spread into his bones. There are few diseases capable of causing as much pain as cancer in the bones. My mom was a retired nurse, and she was Dad's attentive caregiver. She upped his morphine dosage to try and help cope with the pain, and then she upped it again, but nothing was even touching his agony. Finally, unwilling to watch him writhe another moment, she called 911, and an ambulance came and took him to the hospital. Jocelyn, my mom, and I took turns keeping vigil at his bedside, and I will never forget the helplessness of watching him struggle to control, to avoid crying out. It was so painful. And eventually it became apparent that the dosage of drugs it took to make him comfortable was actually suppressing his breathing. That's how bad it was. And so they had to administer oxygen. Well, the next day, an MRI revealed that what was causing Dad's pain was actually not cancer, at least not primarily. The drugs that had been used to control his pain had made his digestive system really sluggish. The present pain was as a result of a bowel blockage. The pain was horrible, but actually it was a gift. The MRI also showed that 2 spots of cancer on his spine, presently not causing pain, were in danger of penetrating his spinal column and causing paralysis. Had he not suffered such cruel pain, he wouldn't have been taken to the hospital or had the MRI. If he hadn't had the MRI, he wouldn't have had the radiation therapy that prevented those cancer lesions from paralyzing him. The pain had a job to do. It was alerting attention to a deeper need. What need is your pain revealing? Have you been ignoring a deep wound that needs to be introduced to Jesus for healing? Is bitterness poisoning you from the inside out? Have you drifted from God? God, in his great love and mercy, will use as extreme measures as he must to gain our attention and draw us back to his side. Our 5th strategy is learn to love. You know, when our own pain is overwhelming, we seldom want to lean into the pain of somebody else. But intentionally sharing the burden of someone else doesn't double our burden. Somehow it actually makes our own easier to bear. My friend Wendy learned this in her season of suffering. She has a friend who was navigating stage 3 ovarian cancer, and Wendy desperately wanted to reach out to her, but having been off work herself because of her own chronic pain for several weeks, she struggled for days to find the strength. Finally, she decided she was going to make a pot of chili for her, and she said to herself, even if all I can do in one day is take the lids off the cans, I'm at least going to start. It took a while, but eventually she finished preparing the chili and she delivered it. Her friend invited her to join the family for supper, and after the meal, Wendy's friend announced, I'm going to lose my hair this week. That's how it works with chemotherapy. It's about the 3rd treatment, and it just comes out just as surely as rain in Seattle. And Wendy's friend had actually this gorgeous hair. She had gorgeous long locks. And the rest of the family didn't want to see the destruction, and they just quietly dispersed. And Wendy sensed that this was somehow a special moment. It was intimate and holy in some way. She took off the long locks in 4 ponytails and tried to style what was left into a cute little pixie cut. And when she awoke the next morning, Wendy was exhausted, but she felt a gentle elation. She realized that she had been a conduit for God to deliver some comfort to her friend. She had had the privilege of investing her limited strength in someone whose circumstances were even bleaker than her own, giving expression to the truth of 2 Corinthians 1:4. He comforts us in all our trouble so that we can comfort others. When they are troubled, we will be able to give them the same comfort God has given us. Deep contentment stemming from looking beyond her own need and strength flooded her day, turning her focus outward, even though it was physically exhausting, brought spiritual refreshment and joy. When we leverage our pain by conveying the comfort God has given us, we're choosing a strategy that feeds our souls. It leaves us feeling nourished and not depleted. Our 6th and final strategy is anticipate eternity. The psalmist said, weeping may last through the night, but joy comes in the morning. Aren't you glad it isn't the other way around? I mean, aren't you glad that it's not like a great night's sleep and then day after day of weeping? If it comes down to the choice, we'd all rather suffer for a little while than for the long term, right? For instance, no one in their right mind would trade a blissful week's vacation for suffering in the balance of their life, would they? You know, could I have a Kleenex, please? I'm sorry, or a napkin. I'm not fussy. I just don't want to, do the tap thing. Right here. Thank you. Thanks. When I talk about these things that are so close to my heart. I never know when it's going to hit me. No one in their right mind would trade a blissful week's vacation for suffering in the balance of their life, right? We would, however, be willing to endure a miserable vacation if we realized the rest of our life would be exhilarating. Our worst vacation ever was to the happiest place on earth. How is it that there are so many miserable people at Disneyland? Crying kids, parents snapping at them and each other, overtired, whining toddlers. You would have to say that our family was not in the ideal frame of mind to enjoy a vacation in the winter of 2010. 3 of the 4 members of our family had just been evacuated out of the wreckage of the earthquake that demolished Haiti on January 12th of that year. We felt exhausted, irritable, and stressed. Classic symptoms of what we were later to learn were post-traumatic stress disorder. We knew we needed to reconnect as a family, though, and we needed to decompress. What better place than the happiest place on earth, really? But our patience wells were down to muddy clay. What a time to navigate unfamiliar roads. This was before GPS, by the way, at least on our phones. What a time to stand endlessly in line and live on top of one another in much smaller quarters than normal. The 3 of us affected barked and snapped at each other all week long. And Kevin, the only family member who had not endured the earthquake, just put earbuds in. But the icing on the cake of our vacation from perdition, as I've come to call it, occurred on our second last night when the 3 of us, ironically the same 3 who were in the earthquake, got food poisoning. Yeah, explosive diarrhea causing, projectile vomiting inducing food poisoning. Envision 4 adults all sharing the same hotel room, with 3 of them charging regularly for the toilet, either to drive the bus or ride the bus, if you know what I mean. I am not sure if I felt sorrier for Kevin, who was not sick but had to listen to the 3 of us moo like dying cattle, or myself. Okay, truth be told, I felt pretty sorry for myself. I found it so incredibly ironic that a person who has spent so much time in the developing world without ever getting sick, who in fact was just evacuated from the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere after the worst natural disaster in recent history, would get such deadly food poisoning in California, which I remind you is home to the happiest place on earth. Well, mercifully, the trip came to an end, and despite dealing still with PTSD, we settled back into our normal, comfortable life. We could not have tolerated much more happiness. As unpleasant as that week was, I would never trade a perfect vacation for a lifetime of misery. The suffering that life dishes out is temporary. Life is not. Even if a person's entire mortal life is one of struggle, their death and burial is not the end of the story. The last chapter has yet to be written. The denouement of the story opens with justice being meted out and rewards presented. We will be reunited with loved ones and never experience sorrow or pain again. Revelation 21:4 says, "He will wipe every tear from their eyes, and there will be no more death or sorrow or crying or pain. All of these things are gone forever." We will instead experience joy, adventure, love, and peace forever. For the believer, this life is as close to hell as we are ever going to get. Do you realize that? For the unbeliever, this life is their heaven. It only gets worse. One day, just a week or so before Father's Day, while I was praying, I began wondering how different my dad's imminent promotion to heaven would look like to my sister Debbie, who is already there. I started to write, and this is what I wrote that day. My dear Debbie, It has been so long since I talked to you or wrote you a text. I miss our daily banter so very much. These days, we are getting ready to say goodbye to another precious family member. Dad is failing fast, and it is simultaneously heartwarming and heartbreaking to see our parents love on each other in the only ways they have left to them. For 60 years, they've cared for and relied on each other. They don't know how to live any other way. I always thought you would be here with Jocelyn and me to navigate through this time of loving and loss, and I miss you so much. I don't know if this would be easier with you here, but I know it would be different. We would be sharing the load and weeping together. Jocelyn and I are a good team. We're making it all work, but we miss our big sister so much. Today I was wondering how all this looks from your side of the veil. Knowing what you know, is it still sad to watch our parents torn from each other after walking through all the seasons of life hand in hand? Or does your perspective cause the joy ahead to obliterate the present tears? If God permits you a window on our lives, you know that Dad may join you any day. Are you rolling out the red carpet? Are you making pierogies, orange jelly salad, and all his other favorites? Are you preparing to spend the best Father's Day ever with Dad? What a joy it will be for you to hear him whistle a happy tune again. Throw little children up in the air while he laughs that big laugh I haven't heard for so long. And play tennis. Hey, in heaven, maybe even you are athletic enough to play tennis with him. I am so thankful for these beautiful thoughts and that we don't grieve, in the words of the Apostle Paul, as those who have no hope. Give Papa a big kiss for me on Father's Day. And I'll hold Mom for you. I love you so much, your adoring sister. There is so much about the eternal life that God has promised his children that we don't know as we struggle to cope with temporary pain. But we do know that it is a beautiful, pain-free, joy-filled life that awaits us, those of us who've been adopted into God's family. How we respond to the inevitable pain we can encounter in this life can not only determine how we cope with difficult, even devastating circumstances, but also where we spend eternity. The pain we suffer in this life is often what guarantees we give serious thought to the next. Temporary pain is sometimes the erosion that our souls need to wear off that abrasive exterior and expose our true essence. And in the meantime, we can know, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that God will never waste our pain. He will use it to draw us to him. And in that loving relationship, he shows us who we really are, who he really is, and how he longs to use us in the lives of others. He also reminds us that heaven is our true home. And when we choose that strategy of focusing our attention on what matters forever, not the moment, then we really have the right perspective. Not many things will last forever, you know. Your job won't. Your house won't. Your bank account won't. Your pain won't. Two things that will: God and people. Truly living, even when life is so hard, comes from drawing purpose, comfort, and strength from God and conveying that comfort to other people. Taking the risk of leveraging your pain will help you think beyond the painful present and travel light. I'd like to invite the band to come up now, and I want to invite you to just spend some time reflecting. Think about that thing that's causing you pain in your life. Think about how you have been managing that. Have you assumed the identity of a victim? Wouldn't you rather be a victor? Look at those strategies. Think about those strategies that I've talked about today, and think about how you can implement one or more of those to redeem your pain into something beautiful. Thank you for finishing our session off for us.
Thank you so much, Donna. I noticed a lot of us had our pen and paper out and were noting the 6 ways that we could redeem the pain. And as she just mentioned now, this is an opportunity for us to just maybe look at that list again and consider some of the things that we've heard this morning and allow God to do something with our pain, our situations, that will be for His purpose in each of our lives and in the lives of family and friends who are watching our pain. Or maybe you know someone else who's in a lot of pain. So as we sing this song together, it's one that we learned this morning. I want to invite you to just press into God. Take some time to pray through the things that we're being taught, and to let God do a deep work in us. We're coming up to lunchtime, but let's nourish our souls just now. All right? So, Father, we thank you that we can come to you, that you know us, and that as you, through Christ, walked this earth, you totally understood our pain. You experienced it on so many levels. So, Lord, we come to you as the one who knows us, knows our situations, the one who redeems all things, redeems even the things that seem so wrong and are very hard. Lord, meet us here in our pain. Sing this together. I come